You're listening to the Southampton Delivery Podcast, a podcast dedicated to the Southampton Football Club and all of the SFC fans.
We just got to go out and express ourselves.
Kante with a scooping header.
We just got to get the job done. I'm here to get the job done.
Подача, Остин все-таки забил.
It's infield to Mane, 25 yards out. Lovely ball for Bella. Onside, 1-0. Buffon shot. Oh my word.
We ran around a bit like Bambi on ice. It was very, very embarrassing to watch.
And now, your host, Matt Markstone.
Hello and welcome to the Southampton Delivery Podcast, a podcast dedicated to the Southampton Football Club and all of the SFC fans. My name is Matt Markstone. I'm the host of the show, and no matter where you are, no matter how you may be listening, thank you for making the show part of your day. I hope that you enjoy it. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome to the show. If you've been here before, welcome back. This is episode 79. This is the first episode after the conclusion of the World Cup. And there was a part of me last week as the weekend approached and as the third and fourth place playoff approached and as the final approached, how was I going to feel when it was all over? As a complete neutral in this, not having the US or Italy or Norway being there, with Saints players having been knocked out early on in the knockout stages, I was looking at, how was I going to feel when all of the football was done and how was I going to cope? And to tell you the truth, I've watched a lot of football over the past month and I enjoyed it. I can't say anything more than that. I really did enjoy, I would say 95% of the matches. I think back to that France-Denmark 0-0 draw. That was pretty bad. But given the fact that we made it through an entire Saints season under Claude Puel and, most of one under Mauricio Pellegrino, I think I can survive one bad 90-minute spell. So anyway, lots and lots of good things coming out of the World Cup, but there are plenty of podcasts that have covered the World Cup and kind of beat it to death. We're not going to do that here. This week, what we're going to do is we're going to focus on the two newest signings that Saints made. And so we will talk with Jon Punt of the Along Come Norwich podcast and of alongcomenorwich.com. The links to that are in the show notes, by the way. We'll talk with Jon about Angus Gunn, about Angus's time at the club, about him leaving his hometown club, which is Norwich, going to City and then coming back on loan in the season he had last year, and all of that stuff. And so we'll talk with Jon about that. We'll get some ideas as to what we think he's going to do or what Jon thinks he's going to do coming into Southampton, what Jon sees as kind of his trajectory or where he thinks he's going to go in terms of his development and stuff like that. So really nice to get some insight. Then after that, we'll talk with Manuel Brewer, host of the Vollraute podcast. And that's a podcast that's done both in German and in English, focused specifically on Borussia Mönchengladbach. There, we'll talk about Jaanik Vestergaard. We'll talk about his time at the club, kind of the role he played in their defense and in their locker room, and maybe what he's going to bring to Saints, and maybe where he'll struggle a little bit coming to the Premier League. So anyway, all of that said, let's jump into the interviews. First up, we'll talk with Jon Punt. We'll talk Angus Gunn. We'll talk a little bit about Harrison Reed as well, because of course Harrison Reed was on loan at Norwich last year. And all of this with Jon Punt of alongcomenorwich.com right after this. We'd like to welcome to the Southampton Delivery Podcast, Jon Punt from the Along Come Norwich podcast. You can get a ton of stuff from them at alongcomenorwich.com, but we're here mostly to talk about Angus Gunn. Obviously, we signed the young keeper from Man City, but he was originally at Norwich and was on loan at Norwich last year. So we're here just to get some insight as to kind of how his career is unfolding and what we can expect from him coming into Saints team, even though we just gave Alex McCarthy a contract extension. So, Jon, welcome to the show, and thanks for taking some time to chat with me.
No, thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. All right, so when Angus was there at the club originally, because this is his hometown club, if I'm correct in what I've read.
Absolutely.
what was it like to get him back from City, or were you disappointed to see him go to City, or you kind of just happy to see him kind of move on and move up, or what was the original kind of feeling around him leaving and then coming back on loan?
Well, it was an interesting story in terms of how Angus left the club. I mean, he originally was on the club's books because his father, Bryan, was a club legend, really. He was a goalkeeper through the late 1980s and then early 1990s. And he was part of the UEFA Cup run that we kind of embarked upon. And that time in the Premier League when we did really, really well, ended up finishing third in the Premier League. So he had a lot to live up to. And his dad was involved in various roles in the club and kind of, commercial manager and involved in the first team in kind of fits and starts. And then Bryan eventually became our manager almost just through default, that, there was no one else in the club that they were prepared to appoint. And they gave him a go. They gave him a go on a caretaker basis, and he ended up winning his first game 4-0. And so he got the reins. And unfortunately, he took us down to League One. Angus was still on the books at that time, and he was representing England at various youth levels and doing really, really well and talked of really positively, kind of within Norwich City circles. And then, unfortunately, at that time, his dad, Bryan, in the first game that we were back in League One, we got beat 7-1 by Colchester United, which was probably one of the lowest points, in the club's history in terms of how far we'd fallen. And we'd been a Premier League club, kind of relatively shortly before that. And Bryan was sacked. And I think his family relocated back up north. And I think that probably severed some ties between Angus and his family and the club. And so Man City came in and obviously saw that he was representing England at various youth levels. At that point, they were looking to, I think, bolster their youth academy, and he was seen as someone who was really up and coming. So, yeah, he ended up going to Manchester City. Fortunately for Norwich, actually, and it's weird how it turns out, that there was a tribunal that set the fee, and I think, if I'm correct in saying so, we've got about a 20% sell-on clause. So we should have made a nice bit of money, actually, with his transfer to the Saints. So, yeah, we're pretty pleased with it.
All right. Yeah, and that fee is somewhere around £13.5 million, depending on add-ons and all that stuff. But I think they snuck a buyback clause in there, which kind of upsets me a little bit. But I think they're just looking out for them, and you don't win the Premier League without kind of doing that at least a little bit. So, when he came back to you this season, did he meet your expectations in terms of a first team goalkeeper? I mean, it is a lot of, he's young, so it's a lot of kind of a weight on his shoulders, especially with his dad's reputation, having been at the club and been a legend, as you mentioned. So did he kind of meet your expectations as a goalkeeper in the first team?
I think we didn't know what to expect, to be honest with you, because he'd been at Man City for that long, really, that we didn't know what we were really getting in on loan. So he smashed our expectations. I mean, a lot of people were saying this is a guy that hadn't played any senior football, no competitive first-team games for Manchester City or anyone else on loan until he joined Norwich. And he played all 46 league games. And actually, I mean, I'm not really a student of the Championship. I usually focus on Norwich, but I didn't see a keeper in the Championship that was as complete and as good as Angus, kind of throughout the time that I was watching Norwich. So, no, he really absolutely smashed our expectations, and it felt like he had an instant connection with the fans, which probably helped because he was a fan before he kind of joined the academy, and he had a season ticket as a youngster, and he used to go and watch Norwich City every week, so it was really nice. But no, I mean, he's an absolutely complete keeper, and I think kind of going on to the fact that you guys are saying that you've just given McCarthy a new contract. Genuinely, I think that he will be your number one throughout most of next season because he's almost flawless, in terms of his capabilities. He's a really, really terrific young goalkeeper.
That's super encouraging to hear. And I know, I haven't heard anything negative about him really. But I know that sometimes when you go and talk to the fans, you will point out the things that maybe need to be worked on. But, in terms of what we really struggled with is we had Fraser Forrester, our goalkeeper for the past few seasons. And he suffered an injury and then kind of hasn't been the same since then. And he's been lacking and coming out and kind of claiming crosses and really commanding the box, even though he's, I think he's 6'4", 6'5", or 6'6", or something like that. Do you worry about Angus maybe not being physically able to come out and command the area in the Premier League?
I think he's got a fairly slight frame. So if you've seen him, and I'm sure you have, it's probably comparing to someone like David De Gea at Manchester United in terms of the fact that he's quite gangly, he's quite skinny. But based on the fact that his father was the same kind of build at that age, and his father has filled out significantly since then, he's a big lad now, is Bryan. I think he'll bulk up. I think, as long as he has the right sports science around him, I think he'll be fine. But that was probably one of the things that really impressed me about Angus last season, and I didn't expect him to be able to do, is actually for a 21-year-old kid, he came in to the team. He looked really assured, really calm, but he was bossing senior pros, senior defenders, lads who've played, 200-300 championship games in front of him. And he was bossing them around, and he was coming to claim crosses. And there was only 1 or 2 games where I saw him get really bullied by, the kind of really rough and tumble championship strikers. So I think there's a little bit to work with there in terms of, him physically developing, but actually in terms of him being I guess him being able to handle the ball properly, to his judgment in terms of when to come out for crosses, when perhaps to leave it to the defenders. That's excellent. So I don't think you've got any worries there at all.
All right. That makes me feel good. What about with the ball at his feet in terms of being able to play that way? Is he semi-comfortable dribbling and distribution wise, or is he more of maybe a shot stopper and then kind of roll it out to the center backs?
I think he's both. I think he's an excellent shot stopper. And I guess a lad with his frame, you'd probably think that's going to be one of his biggest attributes, but probably, again, the one thing that surprised me was how good he is with his feet. So technically, he's really, really good. He was spraying. Sometimes they go wrong, but very often he was spraying, 30-yard balls out to the wing, or kind of playing with his feet a lot. And actually, chatting to his dad about that particular situation and his move from Manchester City to Norwich last season, that was a big part of why they chose Norwich as his next development step, because Pep Guardiola was really keen that Angus gets a lot of exposure with the ball at his feet, because obviously that's the Manchester City way, and that's the way they want to play, is their goalkeepers almost becoming a sweeper, and you've seen that with their first team keeper last season as well. Mm-hmm. So I genuinely thought that, and I was really surprised when he was let go on a permanent to you guys, because I thought he had a future at Manchester City, and I thought they were kind of blooding him at Norwich with a view to perhaps a Premier League loan this season, and then he might be competing for the first team. But he's great with his feet. He's really good at shot stopping. Like I say, the only tiny thing you could say is physically he needs to fill out a bit.
Sure. And he's got, at the age he's at, he's got a lot of time to do that. The goalkeepers,
absolutely,
you're probably looking at least 10 years of him being available to be a first team keeper. And a lot of guys go on even after that. And looking at the coaching staff we have working with our keepers, and we have Kelvin Davis on our coaching roster now, and so he's going to be surrounded by people who have played at the Premier League level, who I think can help him out and maybe work on that aspect. But one of the things I'm glad to hear you say is that he was not afraid to speak to the defenders and do that, because we lacked that last year. McCarthy did it much better than Forster, but that would be my kind of one thing that I would worry about in terms of him being able to come in and provide some instruction, especially because our defense, as it stands right now, is fairly young. And although they've played plenty of games because they were together last year, they lack some direction sometimes. And I feel if we don't have that from the goalkeeper, then we're going to be maybe in some trouble. But do you see him? It sounds like there's a chance he could go forward in the England setup as well. Like, it sounds like he is the real kind of deal, I guess, to be cliche about it.
I think, I don't think you are being cliche about it. He absolutely is the real deal. And I think he will go on definitely to represent England at a senior level. He was called up actually to the squad, I think it was maybe around March time this year. So he was involved with the under-21s. And then one of the senior keepers got injured, and rather than bring in someone else, they saw that this was a guy for the future, and Gareth Southgate brought him in for just to be around the squad and do a bit of training. And from what I understand, he fitted in really well, and they were pretty impressed with what he did. But if he carries on as he is, because last season he was phenomenal, and really kind of, like I said to you before, smashed all expectations. I'd see him being part of the England setup, and I really genuinely wouldn't be surprised to see him be part of the England setup if he got a full season of first team football at Southampton this year. Because you look at the goalkeepers out there now, the English goalkeepers, and I think, all right, Butland and Pickford's had a great tournament, but I could see him really easily ousting someone like Nick Pope, because he is that good, and I think he probably will be as good, if not better, than Jordan Pickford or Jack Butland. Yeah, definitely.
All right. Well, it sounds like we have done a good bit of business. Our club we've criticized them as fans over the past few seasons for not making the right decisions and not maybe getting the right players in, but it sounds like they are back to doing what they've done in previous years. So it makes me happy about that. And if I could ask you, you had Harrison Reed on loan last year as well. He's come back. He's played really well in the couple of preseason games. Granted, it's preseason, but how did you guys feel about him as a player last year at Norwich?
I think I like Harrison Reed as a man. I think he had a great character around the changing room. From what I understand, kind of speaking to a few people around the club, he was really well respected. But when we signed him from you guys, I remember chatting to a couple of Southampton fans on social media, and they were kind of saying, look, Harrison Reed's going to be one of the best midfielders in the Championship. And it really didn't turn out like that. He struggled to become a mainstay of the midfield. And we've got some quite experienced professionals, like Alex Tetty, who's had a lot of Premier League football. Tom Tribal came in and surprised everyone. He came from German football, and he'd had some Bundesliga pedigree. So I think he struggled to perhaps to adapt as quickly as he'd have liked, and perhaps Southampton and Norwich would have anticipated. But it's strangely enough, and I noticed in one of your pre-season friendlies, he was playing in the centre of the park. But strangely enough, towards the back end of last season, our right back, our club captain Ivo Pinto, got injured, and he came in and replaced him for what we thought was probably going to be 2 or 3 games, and he kept Ivo Pinto out of the side for the rest of the season because he was doing so well at right back. And so I think I can't really see him featuring for you regularly, as that kind of engine room midfielder, that box-to-box midfielder, although he is really energetic. But he just looks a little bit sometimes off the pace in terms of his anticipation levels. But I think what you do have is a really, really handy squad player who can fill in various positions, and someone who you could just put on the bench and you could trust him to come on and just do his job, just do as the manager tells him to do. So I think, it wasn't quite what we expected. But equally, he left, and a lot of Norwich fans were hoping that because you guys retained your Premier League status that we'd be signing him. So I don't know. He's okay. It was a solid 6 out of 10 from me for last season.
All right. Yeah. He's been pushing. He wants, consistent football. And that's, we've talked as Southampton fans about the fact that we built a fairly large squad, I think with the anticipation that we would be in kind of involved in Europe, or at least pushing for it, and involved in the EFL Cup or the Carabao Cup, whatever it is, and the FA Cup. And then last year, kind of that run didn't really happen. And so we were left with this kind of big squad and nowhere for people to play. And so you see these guys go out on loan, but he did fill in at right back. We don't really have a backup right back right now. We have center backs who can play out there. But Cedric is, of course, on holiday because he went with Portugal to the World Cup. But Reed actually played as a wing back in one game, and he scored his goal from that. And so I'll take the development. I'll take the game time. I don't care kind of where it is, but I'm glad he was solid for you guys, and I think that's what he's going to be. So
yeah.
Yeah,
I'd agree.
You did mention before we were recording that you guys did an interview actually with Angus's dad.
Yeah, and it was really interesting actually because so we did an hour-long interview with Bryan, Angus's father, for our podcast, the Along Come Norwich podcast, and I'll send you guys a link if any of the Saints fans are interested. But it was really interesting to actually hear about some of Pep Guardiola's training methods and actually what they thought of Angus and what they thought his future might be, and that's why I thought that he would stay at Manchester City and probably get a Premier League loan. And like you mentioned before, maybe because you've got that buyback clause that's been inserted in the deal, it wouldn't surprise me if one day he did go back, because I'd say it again, but I think he really is destined for the top. And if he's not England #1 at some point in his career, I'll be really, really surprised. So now you've got an absolute gem, and I think it's good business all round for all the clubs involved.
All right. Well, Well, best of luck to you guys as the championship kicks off here in a few weeks. And
yeah, you too.
Yeah, appreciate it. And appreciate your time, Jon.
Not at all, Matthew.
Thank you. And special thanks to Jon for taking the time to join me. Once again, you can find more from him at alongcomenorwich.com. And the interview that he did with Bryan Gunn, Angus's father, the link is in the show notes. You can go back and listen to that. Bryan gets some insight on Angus and his development. And also, you get some other things that I think you can only get maybe from a father. And it was nice to hear the panel on the Along Come Norwich podcast kind of be willing to offer some criticism, very little criticism of Angus, because there wasn't a lot, but they weren't afraid to actually talk to Angus, to Bryan, to Angus's father, about some of those things. And I enjoyed the interview. So take some time to listen to that. It's available on SoundCloud and a bunch of other places, but the link to SoundCloud is in the show notes. So go ahead and give that a listen. And once again, special thanks to Jon for taking the time to join me. And in the future, if we have other players on loan, I'd love to get Jon back on the show and I don't know, get his perspective on how our players are doing down there. But now it is time to move forward to talk with Manuel Brewer, the host of the Vollraute podcast. I spoke about it a little bit during the intro. This podcast is done both in German and English, and Manuel now lives in London, but for a long time, and he grew up in Mönchengladbach, but now he watches from London. And he still does the podcast, and he started doing an English language podcast. So it was a great honor to be able to talk to him and get his ideas on Jaanik Vestergaard. And let's go ahead and get to that right now. So once again, this is Manuel Brewer. He hosts the Vollraute in English podcast, the Vollraute Abroad. And the links to that are in the show notes if you're interested, or if you have maybe a Borussia Mönchengladbach fan in your life, share that with them. Links are down there as well. So here's my conversation with Manuel Brewer, host of the Vollraute Abroad podcast, about our newest signing, Jaanik Vestergaard. We'd like to welcome to the Southampton Delivery podcast, Manuel Brewer, host of the Vollraute podcast, Vollraute Abroad, and panelist on the Vollraute podcast in Germany. And I'm butchering that, and I apologize. But welcome to the podcast, and thanks for joining me to talk a little bit about our new signing. Hopefully, we're recording this before he actually is announced, but I think it's coming. So to talk about Vestergaard. But thanks for joining me, and welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. This is it's exciting to talk about players actually coming instead of everybody leaving. I've been on kind of your end of the line before with lots of our players going, so it's nice to have a player coming in that is that we can be excited about. He doesn't feel like a squad player, but we'll get to all of that. So, first off, can you tell us a little bit about the podcast that you host, and also the one that you're a part of?
Of course. So yeah, we just basically got a bunch of people that following Gladbach for decades, essentially. And yeah, we actually found ourselves, over debating football over Twitter, and one of the people started the podcast in German. And we've been running this for over 5 years now. Just had our 100th episode. We're recording about every 2 or 3 weeks. So yeah, it's been going steady. And for a couple of years now, I've been also running the spin-off, so to speak, because I'm in the UK. So I've been running the English language version of the Gladbach podcast. So that's the story.
All right. And so you grew up there, and now you live abroad, and kind of watching the team from afar, has that changed your perception of how things are at all? That being kind of a distance viewer, I guess, and I'm in California, so I'm watching the team from my team from abroad as well. Has it changed how you view the team at all?
Yeah, I guess. I think there's a bit of a distance, not only literally, but there's also a distance with the sort of reports, or going to the games as many times as I wanted to, wasn't possible at some point. So I think there's a good aspect there as well, because whenever Gladbach loses, I can just switch off basically my computer, and that's that, right? As you mentioned, I grew up in the city, and that was far more dramatic if you lose, and everybody's still just talking about that over the weekend. So it's sometimes nice to be able to choose whether or not you want to indulge in football.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess talking about Jaanik Vestergaard, and I mean, he's a big dude. I mean, he is what we've been missing, I guess, on our defense, I think. But he obviously played 2 full seasons for you, made lots of appearances. But I guess for you guys, when you got him from Werder Bremen, did he kind of meet all of your expectations as to what you were getting?
Yes, I think it was a really difficult sort of boots to fill for him, because we had just lost, or we kept losing really, really talented centre backs. So we had an Austrian defender, Martin Stranzl, who was really the rock in our defense for years, and he was then getting towards the retirement age, is now retired, and he had just been outstanding in the last years. And the same can be said for Andreas Christensen, who plays now for Chelsea. So he was a Chelsea loanee for 2 years. And so he had to go back. There was no way we're going to keep him, because even Chelsea realized how good he was. So, he was kind of brought in to replace these kind of players. Of course, expectations were really, really high. But yeah, I mean, he found his, hit the ground running, found his feet. And he, as you said, he, was a regular starter. He made all 34 games in the Bundesliga in the first season. And that continued in the second season. And, in spring, he had diagnosed with a broken foot or ankle, and that only stopped him for a week, which sounds like a miracle healing, but actually it turned out that it was just some strain on a ligament, and there was a small sort of remnants of a broken foot that wasn't that detected months or even years ago. So actually, it was a false diagnosis. So that is to say, he's a tough nut. So he's getting a lot of games on his belt, because he's not really injury prone, which I think is always a big plus for a player.
Yeah, absolutely. I have lots of questions about him, just because one of the things that we've lacked defensively is, I don't want to say experience, because we've had Jack Stevens, who's played now for almost 2 full seasons. We have Wesley Hoot, who came over from Italy. But I think they've failed to adapt to maybe the physicality of the league. They get pushed around, they get bullied by center forwards like Romelu Lukaku, and obviously Lukaku is a big guy and a talented forward. So that I understand that by saying that maybe I'm being harsh, but we've seen time and time again them lose markers or them be out jumped by forwards and not be able to clear balls. And I'm really hoping that what we're getting in Vestergaard is somebody who can establish himself physically in the box on set pieces and with crosses. And I guess from your perspective, is that something that he can do?
I would definitely say so. I mean, he's left the club now with sort of a mixed bag of emotions from the journalists and sort of supporters, I have to say, but overall he ticks some boxes that I think you just sort of hinting at. So he's always been very very physical in his approach, and I think the Bundesliga quite often refereeing is a bit soft. So he got a lot or gets a lot of faults called against him where you'd feel there was just sort of body strength or upper body strength against the attacker in that situation. So I think that works better in the Premier League as sort of a style of defending. And I haven't seen many moments or situations, or I can't remember any of them there where he was just dispossessed by the ball, or just the attacker just pushing his way past him. That actually never happens, and he's quite commanding and on set pieces. He scored quite a few goals for Werder Bremen when he was still there. I think also still before that he was at Hoffenheim, scored a few goals there. And for us, it wasn't as many as his counterpart Ginter on that position, but he scored, I think it was 3 goals last season. And definitely he always looks a threat there. Maybe he could have scored a few more, but he's definitely a presence. And whenever we played a really solid, deeper defense, he was the one to just head it out of a danger zone, basically. Okay. So that's kind of the package you're getting.
Perfect. Perfect. I guess, are there any areas of his game maybe that he needs to work on? Like, how is he with the ball at his feet? Can he dribble? Can he make passes, or is he more just kind of head the ball out and kind of that stuff?
Yeah, that's an area I was kind of hinting at. Where we feel, well, is he, what kind of level is he? Are we going to be sad that he's leaving us? For Gladbach, it's good money. Whatever the final sort of transfer fee will be, seems to be at around 20 million euros. So Weaknesses where I would say that he can be quite erratic at times with the ball, so being a bit sloppy on the ball. That said, he had games where his passing was, he would even be a sort of deep lying playmaker and play these really long cross balls into the wingers that had started, and he actually gave a couple of assists that way, not maybe directly, but the second last pass in the game to prepare the goal. So he definitely has that quality. I think what his game mainly is missing is consistency. And I don't really mean the headers or sort of pure defensive work, but sometimes it's the positioning. But I think that's also has to do with how Gladbach played in the last 2 years. So there was a manager coming in, trying to play a different formation. When we played in a 4-4-2, we looked solid with him. I think the distance between midfield and defense was at times really too big and stretched. And I think any centre back in the world getting sort of really stretched defensive midfield arrangement with himself or the defense is running into trouble, because you have to cover so much ground, you get dragged out by the strikers. And whenever that happened with him, he looked a bit out of place, out of position, obviously, because he's so tall, and he's not the fastest on the turn. Maybe not against the Lukakus of this world, as you mentioned, but there's a lot of fast wingers or rather small strikers also in the Bundesliga, and of course then he looks a bit, he looks a bit, awkward in these situations. Mm-hmm. But I think when your defensive approach is settled and when you have a clear idea, he looks very solid in the central defender position, because he knows how the players around him are positioning, so he doesn't get dragged out too much.
Okay. Now, at times we played a back four. It looks like Mark Hughes is kind of favoring this back three system right now. I think Vestergaard is left-footed, and I have a feeling he may be slotted in on the left, which puts him in competition with Wesley Hood, our signing from last season. But do you think he'll be comfortable in a three? I'm not sure if Gladbach usually play a back four or a back three or a back five, or how you guys usually line up.
Yeah, it's a very valid question, because that's also what we're wondering at the moment. What's going to be next season? There are signs now that, this would be obviously done without Vestergaard, that we are switching to, maybe a 4-3-3 from, traditionally it had been a 4-4-2. That said, our current manager, he played around, including Vestergaard, to play a back three. So I think the system that Hughes was trying, as he said, towards the end of the season with a back three lineup, sort of four more defensive-minded midfielders in front of it. That's something he would be familiar with, and I don't see necessarily a problem with a back three per se, because he would. I don't know if he would put him on the left back three position or in the central position. Okay. Simply because he's so tall, and it's just the one thing to do if they try to play it over the defenders when they play a high line. You want him to be in the center there, because he would just be sort of like a magnet, getting onto all these balls. So whenever there was a back three, he would play the central position, and we had a couple of center backs or wingers that would then sort of tuck in and play the left position in the back three. But he's definitely used to changing the formation in the back.
All right. And I'm not sure how kind of much you've watched him play, kind of for the national team. He didn't make any appearances in the World Cup. He was there, but do you see him as being that international caliber player that at some point he will start for that team, or do you think he is he kind of topping out with us, going to I'm going to get in trouble with my own listeners probably, but essentially we're fighting to be a mid-table team currently. Is this the ceiling for him, or do you think he can push on a little bit more?
I think it really much depends on how he settles in the league, right? The Premier League's quite peculiar. So is the Bundesliga, one could argue, but how the player, how their style adapts to the league is really sometimes, it's really hard to guess. I remember talking to players from other, or fans from other clubs, like friends of mine are Liverpool supporters, and there was going on about the signings they made from the Bundesliga, and some of them worked brilliantly, others worked not at all, and it's really difficult to predict. And if Vestergaard works on his positioning whenever he's high up the pitch, and works on his consistency, which I guess he'll need for the Premier League, because it's, there's such a high intensity that you can't really slack off every other week, right?
Right.
Then if he's sort of stabilized that, and he has enough caps on his belt, he played for three bigger clubs in Germany, or at least 3 clubs that are really established in the Bundesliga. So he has the experience now, and you should really capitalize on that. And I think I don't think he's going to become one of Europe's best defenders. But that said, I haven't seen him play much for a national team. But what I read was that a lot of people were surprised that he wasn't second choice or the first sub on choice when they were playing at the tournament at the World Cup now, and they had, of course, injury problems in the back, so at the back position. So he should have been a regular starter. That's what sort of the observers of the team said. So and overall, I think he has just about international format, but not. I don't think he's gone on to be world class one day. We've seen that with, as I mentioned, Andreas Christensen, who's before at the club was at Chelsea. I think he really showed his potential in the last couple of years at Chelsea and at Gladbach.
Yeah.
But that, I might be completely wrong. If Vestergaard finds really the rhythm at Southampton, which I really wish he'll do, then I think he could just be, fantastic for you guys, because so many games, and we've seen it at the World Cup, are decided now on set pieces, and he's always been a weapon for us in these kind of situations. Not necessarily only scoring, but just dragging the defenders as being a defender himself, dragging them along at a corner kick or a free kick. Because you have to watch that guy. He's like,
right.
2 meters, 6'7", so it's just a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, we're definitely missing that presence, and we were talking just a couple of weeks ago on which defender's going to make way for him if we get this new guy in, and we were linked with Marlon Santos from Barcelona, but he's not Vestergaard. He's not built the same way, and this seems to be more along the lines of what we want. We lost Van Dijk, we lost Jose Font, we lost Toby Alderweireld. We had these fantastic defenders kind of coming through for a long time, and we're lacking just the stability and just the ability just to defend, and so I'm hoping that he comes in and slots in well and can do that. You did mention kind of maybe his lack of pace. I have one specific question. Is he as slow as Mertesacker? Are they the same in terms of pace, or is that just people, other fans just telling us that because they want to be mean?
Rest assured, it's not that bad.
Okay. All right. That makes me happy.
Yeah. No, it's not. It's really, and I was also saying that sometimes his passing skills can be erratic. But that said, Gladbach is one of the few clubs in the Bundesliga nowadays really looking into getting a decent possession game on, and having the ball most of the time. So he gets a lot of touches during the game. So, and again, the vast majority of the time he's just comfortable with it. We're not talking about somebody who's like panicking as soon as he gets the ball. So sure. It's complaining on, I guess, quite a high level.
Okay, all right. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with fans being a little critical as long as we can get the balanced view out there as well. I don't know. Is there anything else you'd like to add about him, or about your show, or about Gladbach in general?
Well, I just think it's a really cool thing that I actually quite like it when being in the UK, when German players or players from the Bundesliga are signing for English clubs, for that matter. I think it's just really interesting. Obviously you signed also Højbjerg, and it's just always fun to see sort of how, as I was saying earlier, how these players develop. The De Bruyne of these worlds, he's done, he was just fantastic at Wolfsburg, and came into City, and it just worked. Whereas other players, it doesn't. So I just really hope that it's going to be a really success story for Vestergaard and for Southampton there.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be nice for him having Højbjerg there, having somebody who's already made that exact same, well, not the exact same, but a similar transition from the Bundesliga over, and also having the on the fringes of the Denmark squad, having that in common as well. So hopefully he'll slot in there and feel comfortable in the locker room. And it looks like we have a young, we're getting quite a few transfers in this summer, so that's nice. But we have a locker room that's fairly well established, and I think we're going to have some leadership turnover in there. There's rumors of some of the veteran guys kind of moving out, but I think it'll be fine. And I think, people are going to notice him when he walks in because he's going to be the biggest guy there. So it'll be nice.
That is is an interesting aspect to maybe, finish on that. So actually, he was also brought in to maybe take a sort of leading, leader role at Gladbach. As I said, some of the really, Christensen is really young, but Stranzl was in mid-30s when he left the club, and he had been a leader in and off the sort of the pitch. And Vestergaard, with having had lots of caps in Germany, he was brought in to be that voice sort of in the locker room, as you said. And maybe he was still missing a little bit of that, but I think Danish players really, or just Denmark in general, they're really looking. The football is really, watched. The Premier League is watched a lot there, and it's just focus is really on football and in England. So I think maybe now he's really in the limelight for for also the national team. And I think maybe also he sees that as a chance to step it up a little bit more and be that sort of in his prime age. He's 25 and really take the lead for Southampton's defense.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to it, and I was already excited before we talked, but now I am definitely looking forward to him coming in, and everybody's coming back from China. They're coming back from their first kind of preseason training camp, and so everybody should be kind of getting back into it later this week. So hopefully he will be a part of that coming up, and maybe he might still be on holiday because of the World Cup exploits, but we'll see. So. Manuel, I just want to say thank you for sharing your time with me. I know it's late over there, but I appreciate your time and I appreciate your insight.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me. It was great fun.
All right. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
And that does it for this episode of the Southampton Delivery Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope that you've enjoyed it. Special thanks this week goes out to Jon Punt of the Along Come Norwich podcast and alongcomenorwich.com, and to Manuel Brewer of the Vollraute podcast. You can check them out. There's more from them. And don't forget about the interview with Bryan Gunn on the Along Come Norwich podcast. That link is also in the show notes. You can get in touch with this show on Twitter at SFCDELL_IBERY. We're on Instagram by the same name. The Facebook address is facebook.com/SFCDelivery. There is no underscore in the Facebook address. You can always email the show at southamptondelivery@gmail.com. If you submit questions to the show, you can do so anytime by using the hashtag SFCDel, and we'll do our best to get them on the show. Thank you for listening. If you haven't subscribed yet, maybe you're new to the show, you can do so on iTunes, Stitcher, Acast, Google Play, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, or wherever else that you listen to podcasts. If you have questions about that, send me a DM in any of the ways previously mentioned, and I'll do my best to help you out. Be sure to visit our partner, the Southampton page on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. For all your Southampton news and needs, be sure to visit the Southampton page on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. The links are in the show notes. The logo for this show is done by Matt Beeling of the We Are Southampton page on Instagram. For all your matchday edits, polls, competitions, and more, be sure to check out the We Are Southampton page on Instagram. Music for the show comes courtesy of the Free Music Archive at freemusicarchive.org. The intro song is Epic Song by Boxcat Games. The end of show credits that you're listening to right now is Aim is True by Poddington Bear. Links to all of those are in the show notes, so don't hesitate to click on them if you feel the need. As always, I truly appreciate you listening. I hope that you've enjoyed it. If you have, please consider leaving a review on iTunes. It does help spread the show to new listeners. And you can do your part also by spreading the show manually by just sharing the episode link or the Twitter handle or the Instagram feed with those of your friends who are Saints fans. So anything you do there would be much appreciated. That's it for now. But until next time, remember that together, we march on.